Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to the Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where we call back the previous episode. This week, we are calling back episode 270 with the gentleman from behind the funny podcast, Scott and Ace. I'm your host for this podcast, Dan Bublitz Jr., and with me, as always, is my right-hand man, the co-host, co-producer, Josh Shirley. How are you doing on this fine Thursday, Mr. Josh Shirley?
It is a fine Thursday. I live in Kansas City, as many of you know, and the weather cannot make up its mind about what we're doing here. I just want to pick a direction and go. We're 80 degrees, we're 30 degrees. We're 80 degrees, we're 29 degrees. It's just peaks and valleys here. And I just want an answer from Mother Nature. You know?
Just make up your mind. Make up your mind. I get that. It's beautiful here in sunny Colorado. You know, usually you think sunny California, but sunny Colorado. It's been beautiful. We got a little bit of snow a couple days ago. It's pretty much already gone. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right, well, we've got a lot to talk about on this episode. This episode, we're going to be spending a lot of time on one particular subject that came up a lot in our conversation with Scott and Ace, and that is professionalism, being a professional and, you know, being funny while being professional. When you think of that, let me ask you this, Josh. When you hear the term professional or professionalism, in relationship to comedy or entertainment, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be a professional in comedy?
It means you're reliable and you'll get the call, not just because you're talented and funny or even because you're the best. You'll get the call because people can trust you. Absolutely.
That's a good definition. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of qualities that make that happen, and, making, even within that, you talked about, being reliable. So, somebody that can be called upon to get the job done. Well, that in itself is a huge attribute to being a professional. Obviously, there's things within that, to be reliable, you have to, come to your show on time. You have to have all the information, know the information of the show. And sometimes that's not all on you. I mean, but it is, to be professional, you need to ask the right questions. Even if you're a producer, if you go into a show and you have no idea what's going on, but you didn't ask any questions, you can blame all the other people all you want. But if you didn't ask any questions either, that's just as much on you as it is everybody else. Because that's part of being professional is being prepared. Part of being prepared asking the right questions, getting the information that you need, knowing what time you need to be at the venue. That's one thing I always try to ask once I get booked. And as it gets closer to a show, I always reach out to the booker or the producer or whoever booked me and say, what time do I need to be at the venue? What's my check-in? So that way I can leave in plenty of time. And, with that, you got to think about traffic, especially if you're in a bigger area. Like you live in the Kansas City area. I live, in Colorado. I'm a smaller area, but I got to go to Denver a lot, which is a big metro area. And you got to account for traffic. Otherwise, you're going to end up being late. I mean, sometimes even if you account for traffic and you're, think you're going to be on time, there are instances where something's going to happen and it'll still prevent you. But in that case, you need to message whoever booked you and let them know, hey, I'm stuck in traffic because of this, whatever it is, this situation beyond my control.
Be a person who has a job. I mean, like if you look back at the episode, and if you haven't listened to it, everybody, go ahead and go back and listen to it. Dan and I'll wait. Okay,
yep,
go ahead and listen to the episode. We'll be right here.
Okay, and now that you listen to it,
welcome back. All right, thanks for doing that. So what you heard from Scott and Ace was they're describing some pitfalls or some bad experiences they've had with other comics when they're wearing the producer hat. And they're describing things that have nothing to do with whether or not the person's talented. It's about, someone's not communicating with me that they can't make the show, or they're not communicating clearly about why they can't make the show, which is forcing me to draw my own conclusions about the seriousness with which they're actually taking this role, right? Like, I'm not going to go have coffee with somebody and talk about future endeavors when they're not giving me really explicit reasons why they're canceling on me 20 minutes for the show or whatever the circumstance was. But do I have this right, Dan, that like every time they listed a problem that they had with somebody else being on their show, it was really just a matter of logistics
and communication, which is part of logistics. But a lot of it was, not communicating in enough ways in the sense that, being very vague or whatever. And I know I'm ADHD over here popping all over, but this just made me think of that, is that too, when you're thinking about professionalism, and it came up because of this, what you were talking about with their examples, is that you don't take a gig if you can't do a gig. Don't tell. Yeah. And what I mean by that is if you take a gig that's, say, for a clean show, don't tell a booker you can work clean if you can't work clean. And then you have to struggle to try to work clean. That's part of being a professional, is being able to admit that, I'm not the right person for this job. This particular show, I'm just not going to fit what you need. And being open and honest about that makes you a true professional. You know your limitations and you know where you excel. And being able to communicate that with people and be honest about it is a huge, huge attribute of being a professional.
That's right. And it establishes trust when you're honest about it. And it means that they're more likely to call you back when you are ready. Think about it like that. I think a lot of people are doing what you're saying, Dan, because they're afraid of losing the opportunity.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of what it is.
Yeah, but in reality, if you take an opportunity and you squander you're gonna ruin your chances to ever work there again by not being truthful about your limitations. And I think Dan and Scott are both victims of that when they describe their bombing stories.
Yeah, absolutely. That came up in both of their situations. And that's exactly, because that's another thing too, where you don't think, a lot of comics, we think too short term when it comes to like gigs. We're like, what's the next gig? How can I, what's right after that? I did this show, what's tomorrow? That kind of mentality. But we don't think about long run. And when you take a gig that you're not ready for, especially when it comes to like the material preferences, if you say that you can do 30 minutes clean, but really you only got a 5-minute set clean and you're going to try to stretch 25 minutes, not only are you not going to get booked at whatever show that is, those producers are going to talk. And when, and, you know, if somebody's looking for a clean comedian, they're not going to recommend you. You know, if you did a poor job on their show and somebody asked them, they're going to be honest. They're not going to keep helping you get work. They're going to say, oh yeah, they did my show. They did 5 minutes of really good material, and the other 25 minutes was just horrific crowd work. And it, you know, and the show wasn't good. Or they'll say they couldn't do any clean material at all. They said they could, and the first thing they did was walk up there and talk about how they don't do clean and went right into their normal act, which is a huge, huge no-no as far as being a professional. And that's one of my pet peeves in comedy is when somebody does that. They'll take a gig that they know they can't do and then proceed not to follow the rules of the contract that they agreed to, because that's what you're doing. When you take a gig, if it's a clean gig, you're agreeing to those terms. And that's why you need to ask. It goes back to what I said right at the top, asking questions. You need to ask questions, you know, even on clean shows that I do, a lot of times, even on my corporate gigs, I ask if there's any material restrictions, you know, if there's just certain topics that they don't want me to talk about. Are they limiting my creativity? Maybe to a extent, but not really, because they're my client. I want to make sure that they're happy with my product and that it fulfills their needs. And if they don't want, you know, some controversial material because it may cause problems with it, whatever organization they are, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to put them in that position, you know, and I want them to give me a good recommendation or, you know, a good review so that I can potentially get other work. So definitely, you know, remember, that's a contract. Even if it's a verbal thing, if you agree verbally that you can work clean and then you go and not work clean and you do it on purpose, at that point, you're just an ass.
Yeah. And I think I was an ass earlier because I referred to Scott and Ace as Scott and Adam, I think earlier in this episode. So that's a test for everybody. I was demonstrating how not to be professional. And I hope you caught that, everyone. But no, just to stay with that point, you know, like agreeing to do a clean show and then showing up and then doing something dirty is the same as agreeing to do a clean show and then showing up and playing death metal for everyone. I mean, it's exactly what you weren't hired to do. So
exactly,
it's a breach of contract. It'll get you not paid. And they gave and I think Scott's story was where he tells a Catholic story, a Catholic school story where he was literally in front of a Catholic school, you know, didn't have the professional wherewithal to know where he was, and then tells a probably the worst joke you can tell in that scenario. I can't think of a worse fit for a worse read of the room than that. And,
pretty bad.
You know, and he totally owns it, you know, and so the worst thing, and it was funny that, you know, he introduces the other comics and they all come out and do great. And then every time he's reintroduced and has to come out, he's like,
they're just like, no, thank you.
And Scott Higgins comes out. Hey guys, me again, the person you hate. Yeah. And I can sympathize. I can sympathize with Scott on that point. I think what I did was not nearly as blatant, and I didn't have to sit and stew in it for as long on stage as he did. But I've definitely done something similar. And another thing that they brought up that just on the point of professionalism is doing your time, like staying in making sure that you're filling the time on the show.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's where, again, you know, honesty, if we were going to break this down into, you know, different points, I guess, honesty would be one. And that's where this all comes into. This would all fall under honesty. So you have your reliability, which, you know, means you show up on time, you're you're doing the job that you're asked to do, so on and so forth. And you have honesty, which is being honest with yourself, honest with them, honoring your commitments as well. And honoring the time commitments, because that's what happens a lot. A lot of times comedians will take a gig even though they know they're not ready for. And if you do that, you can't jump early, or you got to be honest with people. Like when I'm hosting a show, I would rather have somebody come up to me before they're set and be like, hey, I know I said I could do 15 minutes, but I don't know that I can. I know I have a solid 10, and be like, okay, well, that's great. Because then at least I know too, because that's the other thing that happens when somebody jumps early. If the MC is not in the room, or, because they might have to go to use the restroom, take a break,
you're not
or whatever.
ready.
And I've seen that happen where, been at, granted, I think it was like a showcase or maybe an open mic. So not as a big of a deal. It's still awkward though. But
it's awkward.
Somebody just jumps early, and then the host was like in the bathroom, and it was really weird. And it makes it
you're
weird.
like you set your phone for 5 minutes so you can remember when to light, and then you got your 5. You smoke your cigarette, you go to the bathroom, and
do the things you need, go refill your drink.
90 seconds. You're like, son of a bitch.
Yeah, what? What? They just got up there. Why are they bailing?
What are you doing? Yeah, but even worse in a paid scenario where I've had that happen. I had that, on a show I did last year. I had somebody come in who was supposed to do 30. That person, for whatever reason, just wasn't performing well, and she just decides, 14 minutes is a good time to bring the next comic up, which was me. And, so I had to do, instead of my 10, I had to do, 25 in order to close that gap. And, the show must go on. It's something that to be professional, do the time you're agreed to. Yep.
And with a situation like that, was that your show that you were producing?
I was, but I had put myself in it as a guest spot for 10.
The reason I ask is because I'm curious. Did you pay them what you agreed to?
No, I didn't. Because actually.
I had a similar situation on a show that I produced where the comic, the headliner vouched for him as a feature, and funny comic, and I had no idea, but he couldn't do a full 30, and I wasn't aware of this. I'm thinking he's going to do a full feature set, and that's what he agreed to. I was very clear with, you're getting this amount of money for this amount of time, and he did about half the time. And so after the show, I was, I just tried to be straight up with him. I said, you didn't do the time we agreed on. You only did half the time, so I'm only going to give you half the money. The other half is going to go to the headliner because they have to fulfill the time.
Yeah. So, and I didn't penalize her quite that much. Like, I still paid her probably 80% of what. So I had kind of a co-headline situation. Yeah. I had her come up and do 30. Had another comic do 30 at the end. I was in the middle for 10, and I had an MC do about 15. So, decent size show, just about the right amount of time. She probably got 80% of what the other one did. So, she still drove out there. It was kind of far away. She's a good comic and normally does really well. And so, it was just kind of, but you're right. Like, I got to spread this money out to everybody else who kind of had to cover ass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way I look at it. I mean, when you agree to do a certain amount of time and you don't fulfill that time, you're breaching your contract, and that's what it goes down to. And part of that breaching a contract, there's consequences. If earlier you were talking about, being professional, we were talking about, doing your time and doing the material you agree to do and things like that, because it could lead to not getting paid. A good example, if you go back and listen to the episode with Adam Mamawala, he didn't even intentionally, he thought he was okay with a couple of the things he did, but he had 2 stories where he didn't get paid or didn't get paid fully because of, something he said that, made the people who hired him mad. So that
Right.
can definitely happen in this business. That's why being a professional is important. Another thing I would say with professionalism, do the job that you're hired to do. And what that means, if you're hired to be the MC, be the MC. And remember, there's things as the MC that you got to do, but when you're the MC, you're representing the venue, you're representing, if it's an independent production, you're representing that company. If it's at a comedy club, you're representing that comedy club. Even though you're not a direct employee, you're still a representation of them while you're doing that. So you got to make sure you're doing a good job representing them. And, and if you're a feature, your job is to be a good and both the MC and the feature's jobs, that kind of go hand in hand, where the MC's job, you got to remember, the show's not about you. You're not the star. So if you don't do very well, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't care about you want to do well and be funny, but you shouldn't be trying to be like, well, I need to be the funniest comedian on the show. No, that's not your job. Your job is to get the crowd's mind ready for comedy. And you do that by going out cold. Your job is to do announcements, do rules, and then bring up the other comedians and make them feel like the stars of the show. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that I was just going to commend you on bringing this topic up, because it's another tie-in to the subject, and Ace and Scott talk about it quite a bit. One of them had a story about, I was in a room, I was doing my stuff, I wasn't crushing, but I got the biggest laughs by pointing out the obvious, which is kind of the MC's job. Like, when I was doing my role correctly is when I was rewarded the most. And I found the same thing in times where I'm MCing. Like, occasionally there's crowds, I'll go out, I'll MC, and I'll just crush as a comic, right? Like, I'll do some crowd work to get some things set up, and then I'll be able to tell jokes and do material, and that feels great. It's really rewarding. But for the most part, that's not my job. My job is to get this group of individuals into one room who are all there to enjoy the jokes that the other comics are telling. I've got to set them up for success.
That's exactly it. And I think that's lost on a lot of comedians too. I always look at a comedy show. It doesn't matter, if it's a showcase or just a regular show, we're a team. It is, even though we're individual comedians doing our own material, one show is a roster of comedians, which means they are on the same team. And the goal is to knock it out of the park and win. And to win, that means working together, creating some synergy. But the whole goal, the way to win, is that audience leaves thinking, wow, that was the best show that I've ever been to.
Exactly.
And it's a team effort. Like I said, the MC has a particular job of getting the crowd in the mindset for comedy and doing the rules and everything. And then, the features job, again, not necessarily you want to crush, but that's not your whole job. Your job as the middle is to really set the headliner up so he can knock it out of the park. That's what you're getting them going. You're loosening them up. They've started having drinks. You're getting them. They're in now. They're definitely in the mindset of comedy. They're laughing. They're having a good time. And you're creating this wave that now the headliner gets to jump on and surf all the way to the finish line. And that's, and when that's done, the crowd leaves going, wow, that was the best show I've ever seen. Everybody on the show was amazing.
Yeah.
And that, ends up creating a great show. I would like to add too, I know we could talk about professionalism all day long.
Yes, we could.
Because we already talked about being reliable. We talked about being honest, showing up on time. But one thing we didn't touch on, and I do want to touch on with being professional, one of the most important things that will make you stand out as a professional is how you interact and treat other people. If you let your ego control things and you go into, if you show up to the venue whenever you want because you're the headliner and you don't care about what time you're supposed to be there. If you were told to be there by this time, but you show up whenever, you don't call, text, do whatever because you're the big time headliner, and then you start, down talking to people and things like that, it's going to look bad on you and people aren't going to want to work with you. I've said it many times on the, excuse me, I've said it many times on this podcast, but just be nice. It's not like you have to go out of your way, but just be kind and courteous to people and stay out of the way of the people working, the staff. You don't go in and demand your drinks right away if there's a huge line of people waiting for drinks, or, you step off to the side, let them do their job, come back when they're not so busy. Be nice to the people, treat them like they're human, and if you're nice to them, they're going to remember. And a lot of comedians don't think about this. And I've seen it really, we have a comedy club here, Comedy Works, and I know the Comedy Fort, I've heard people talk about this. Their staff will report back to management. And, if comics are treating them like crap, they're going to let the management know. And guess what? Those comics aren't getting invited back. Like that's, and a lot of comics don't think about that. So you got to just be nice to everybody. And just that is going to set you way ahead of the game as being a professional.
Right.
Just be nice. Just be nice. Don't be an asshole. That's what I'm saying.
Just be a good person, everybody.
Yeah, go in there, be a good person. Treat everybody kind. Be nice.
I think that's a real sparkly way to end it.
It absolutely is. Be kind and courteous.
Be excellent to each other, as Abraham Lincoln would say.
I love it. That's your call to action. That's your call to action from this episode. Be kind and courteous. Be excellent to everyone. All right. Well, yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. Make sure you're following us on all the social medias. If we'd like to get some feedback as well. If you've been enjoying this new format that we're doing with these callbacks, and we'd like to just hear kind of what you think about what we're doing. It would be nice to have a little bit of feedback. You can do that in the Facebook group. You just go to facebook.com/artofbombingpod group. Oh, it's actually the Bomb Squad. Art of Bombing Bomb Squad is the name of the group. So go leave us some feedback in there. That would be great. Or, if you can comment in different places, give some feedback. Instagram, wherever you want to give us feedback. We'd love to hear it. And if you want to support us, the best way to support us, follow the podcast, like our content, all the stuff we say every week, in and out every week. But if you want to get involved and support us financially, we have a fun way you can do that. You can go to buymecoffee.com/AOB pod, and you can throw a tip in the coffee pod. And then by doing that, you also get the privilege of firing Josh.
Yes.
That's right.
That's right, everybody.
Fire Josh every week.
I need to be fired. It's your fault that I still work here, everybody.
Exactly. You're not firing Josh. So if you want to
think about the other employees, do the right thing.
Exactly. So again, that's Art of Bombing Pod Art of Bombing Pod. That's the website. artofbombingpod.com is the website. The Buy Me a Coffee is buymeacoffee.com/AOB pod. All right. That's going to do it for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Roar.